Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Listeners, if you enjoy this podcast, I promise you will love my new audiobook for Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. It's not about the quarantine, but a lot of the essays were written during that time about other things that moms don't have time to do or other busy people, things like reading, eating, working out, breathing, having sex, and 60 best-selling and notable authors wrote essays. All those authors have been on this very podcast. So if you like to listen to my conversations, if you want to get to know these authors better, I read the audiobook myself. Check it out on Audible, Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. Again, Audible audiobook. Go listen to it. It's like 60 mini podcasts. I hope you enjoy. Sunjeev Sahota is the author of China Room, a novel. He is also the author of Ours Are the Streets and The Year of the Runaways, which was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and the Dylan Thomas Prize and was awarded a European Union Prize for Literature. In 2013, he was named one of Granta's 20 Best of Young British Novelists of the Decade. He lives in Sheffield, England with his family. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss China Room. I'm so excited that you're here.
Well, thanks, Zibby. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So would you mind telling listeners what your book is about? And also, I would love to hear more of the backstory of your family and how this is sort of loosely based on folklore in your own family and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the book's about a place, a room in a farm in rural India, in a state in the northwest of India called Punjab, and the two lives that that inhabit that room and also in turn inhabited by it. So in 1929, we have Meher, who's a young girl. She's 15 years old, and she's one of three women that have been married to three brothers. And because of the customs of the time and the fact that they were married in one ceremony and they're kept sequestered from the men, she doesn't know which of the brothers her husband. So the novel, in a way, charts her desire to not only just find out who it is that she's married to, but also her development to an increased knowledge of her own personhood, of her own right to feel desire and to have needs and wants of her own, and for freedom and self-expression. So that's 1929. Then there's another strand set in 1999, which is when a young man, her great-grandson, we come to learn, comes to stay on the farm in that same room to kind of come to terms with his own travails and his difficulties of growing up in kind of the deindustrialized north of England. So it's a story set across three summers actually, where both these characters are trying to, it's a summer of reckoning. They're trying to come to terms with ideas of self-worth and freedom, and both kind of like to try to make themselves kind of liberated. I think, yes, the story of liberation, I see it. And yeah, it's the seed of the story was this kind of this legend or this family lore about my great-grandmother, who was apparently one of four women, actually not three, one of four women who was married to four brothers. And so the story goes, how this story has been embellished over the decades, Lord knows. But it's always been passed down that they didn't know which of the brothers, or she didn't know which of the brothers she was married to until a year later when they saw who was holding which child, when they'd all actually had a child by then. And it was always spoken of with a degree of kind of humor or levity, this story, but it always struck me as being quite a dark and painful kind of story as well, if not predominantly. So there was that first kind of seed, was perhaps that story of that legend of my great-grandmother. And secondly, the fact that room still exists, and it used to be called the women's room. Then now it's that room on that farm, which is my family's farm in India, is now used as a grain store, and it's still got bars on the window. And it just made me think about why was it called the women's room? What did they do in there? Why were they in there? And what did being in that room for so long actually mean and do to them? So that was the second thing. And then the third thing, there was also some sketchy detail, some very sketchy detail about a male ancestor of around that time who was involved in some sort of scandalized way with the burgeoning Indian independence movement. So those three things kind of were the three posts around which I kind of webbed and created the kind of a work of fiction.
Wow. So tell me about how this started. So one day, are you just like walking by the bars and the windows and you're like, ooh, maybe this could be a good novel? Like, when did you take the seed of it? And then how did you decide this was going to make it as a novel? Like, did you test it out? Did you know right away? Did you write any of it? Did you outline it? Like, I'm just very fascinated by the idea of when we get these glimmers of ideas, how do you know when it's going to be a great book, and how far do you take it until you decide?
Yeah, no, Zibby, I really didn't. You never know whether it's going to turn out to be a book, whether it's going to be an idea that's discarded. I find that's part of the writing process for me, that a lot with all my books so far, sometimes as much as 60,000 words, I'll get into a book and then I'll find out it's not working. I have to just discard it and start again. It's always frustrating, to say the least, but I think it's just part of how I work. But with this book, I started off with, as I said, there was this idea of this. It just felt to me that premise, not knowing who your husband was, could give rise to so much drama. Just so much kind of in there and how it might play out over the generations and over the years. So I started writing that story, and in my initial idea was it would just play out over the generation, and we'd see what kind of awful misunderstanding, how that might play out over time. And this the 99 strand was never in my sort of consciousness at that point. So I started writing that story in about 2017, and I wrote about maybe 15,000 words. And before that kind of wobble in my writing, which I've become so used to, happened, and I thought, this isn't working. I didn't see why I needed to write that story. I didn't see what was the urgency behind that story. I seemed to require something really pulling me to the page. This story the sense that this story has to be written for me to actually keep turning up at the desk. And so it wasn't. I lost kind of faith in that story, and I remember talking about it with my friends that the story just died. It was like a bereavement, that the story just died on me. I can't. It's not mine to tell. So I set that aside. And actually, one of the ideas in that initial idea I had was this idea of a doppelganger. It was going to have a kind of a magical element to it. Idea of the idea of the double and seeing a double. It's quite a potent image in Indian folklore as well as in other mythologies as well. And it's kind of a harbinger of death and doom and end of times. That was that. So though I thought I'd set aside that story, that image of the doppelganger really stayed with me. So I started writing what I thought were completely separate and different novels with this playful image and this kind of fantastical image of the doppelganger. And it was set in the future. The stories, these kinds of other novels I started writing or starting to write, they were set in the future, where the kind of doppelgangers were kind of like happening. It sounds all very strange. Where it sounds strange. But slowly those doppelgangers, because they weren't quite coming to life, so I started putting myself into those stories or versions of myself. And slowly this doppelganger became a version of me, until I realized that it was just a version of me that I was transmuting and mapping onto the page. And so these doppelgangers in time as well, whereas the story was set in the future, became closer and closer to our present moment, and then kind of went past the present moment into kind of like this slight historical past. So I realized I was writing about a version of myself, and that I was actually writing something that was perhaps quite auto-fictional. And then I realized that this would have been in 2019. And then I realized that this character this unnamed narrator that I was writing about, his kind of concerns and his difficulties and what he was searching for were also liberation, freedom, kind of a place to call home. And then I remember thinking, well, that's quite similar to what this Meher character that I was writing about 2 years previously was also kind of dealing with. So I took that back out of the drawer, that initial 15,000 words, and I realized that these stories actually could be a whole, and they could both belong side by side, or they could spiral around each other. And that's how I see the stories in the book. They do spiral around each other. So that's kind of how they came to be the novel came to be, really.
I love that. That's so interesting. So it just goes to show, don't throw away those extra words that maybe you feel like the story has died, and yet you can revive it. These are resurrectable, if you will, the discarded drafts.
Yeah, nothing's ever lost. I do believe that everything will kind of find its way in there somehow. Yeah, even when you think, there's no way it can be. Yeah.
Wow. In the book, I was really struck by how much fear there must be. I mean, we're living in this time of like Me Too and women being able to say no and women's rights and the actions of men against women. The idea that Meha and her siblings or her sisters-in-laws, or I don't even know what you call them, that they're all there and yet they can't even see barely who it is, and they don't know, and all they can feel are the calluses and catch glimpses and try to see out from their veils the next day. I mean, it's really almost hard as a woman to even process how that would be, and then to have to open yourself up and like have children with these men who are like essentially animal. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. Anyway, the way you made it was so vivid and kind of horrifying, to be honest, putting myself in these women's shoes. So I don't know, you definitely created this world where that was, and even the way that they laughed together and they tried to find the humor in it to get through, as women often do in difficult situations, and try to find any sort of levity during what must have been like a very disheartening time, to say the least. I don't know. I was really struck by all that.
Thank you. I'm not sure thank you is quite the right. I'm glad it was vivid. That's kind of what you want on the page. You want the page to feel alive. You want it to actually, kind of live inside the reader's head. But you're right, they have no voice. They have the women, Meher and Herbanson and Galeen, the two sisters-in-law, they have no right to feel anything. They have no right to know anything, according to the other people in the house, not least their kind of the tyrannical mother-in-law, whose kind of watchful eye they live over. And today we would consider those behaviors in terms of gendered power dynamics, but of course those kind of terms weren't available to them. But nevertheless, it's really interesting to me how those kinds of power dynamics do play out and do corrupt kind of like these people's love for each other, actually. So even though on one hand the story could be read as a kind of a love story between Meher and Suraj, but also it's a love that is corrupted by these very gendered power dynamics. So how much is, and this is a note in the book, how much is Meher's professed love for Suraj actually just her projection for her need for freedom? How much does she just see him as a vehicle to get her out of the China room and to get to a place where she does have greater liberation? And likewise, how much is Suraj's professed love for Meher actually just a projection and an illustration of his need to sort of like, as he says, destroy the world, the difficulties he faces to be the youngest born son in a family where the youngest is not allowed any or permitted any sort of rights to land or to, status. So it's interesting to me how the gendered power dynamics do actually play a big part in their feelings for each other. And also I just love the fact that Meher, she is, you're right, she doesn't have a voice, but she is courageous, she is strong-willed, she is spirited. And part of, the joy for me in the book is watching how she kind of takes ownership of her right to feel desire and of her right to her own personhood as the novel goes on.
Wow. Did you debate using any other titles, or were you sure this would be it the whole time?
Titles? Well, no, when I was started, it was called The Women's Room, which to me felt a little, never quite sat right. It felt a little too on the nose and just slightly both too generic and also just too particular, because it didn't really, it kind of pointed too much to that space without talking to the things that the space might represent a bit more widely. So when China Room came to my head, it felt right. And usually with titles, that's it. When you have it, they feel right, and either they refer to something in the novel or they refer to something outside of the novel. But China Room did both. It both refers to the space, but also refers to what that space represents. It points outside of the space as well. And China, and I have these silly ideas that China is, the idea of delicacy versus room, which is room's meant to be quite solid spaces. I like that kind of opposition. And also, and this is a silly thing, I like the fact that no letters in the word China are repeated in the word room. So as if both the words are kind of like, the letters all stand apart and they're kind of like they're staring at each other in quite a spare kind of like, gazing quite like a hard way. And which no one else will ever notice, but it's something that I think appeals to my sense of what a good title can do and can be.
Interesting. Letter repetition. I've never even really thought about that, but there you go. Who knew? Well, I think that's definitely a good call because, yeah, I feel like the women's room could be the bathroom. I mean, that's what I would,
Yeah.
So anyway, you dodged a bullet there. Nice job. Wait, so how did you become a novelist to begin with?
Well, I think like most writers, I was a reader first, or I was a late reader. I didn't start reading novels until I was in my late teens, till I was about 18, when I really got the bug, and I realized that through the act of reading was where I found meaning in that kind of that conversation between reader and writer, is where meaning is kind of like producing, watching these characters going through their lives in this hypothetical space, which we call a novel, was where actually ideas of truth and dramatic truth actually really came to the fore, and they really resonated really strong with me. And when I first started reading novels, I was just reading, so heavily, I was reading beautiful novels a day. It was like a dam had burst in this world of storytelling that just sort of came over me like a wave. So I read heavily, and then at some point, I started asking questions of the writer beyond the page, like, why did you write this book in this way? Why in this order? Why not like this instead? And I think once you start wondering how a book is put together and how it works, for some it's not too great a leap to think that you can have a go yourself. Actually, I could have a go at this. I can actually see if I can do the nuts and bolts and the mechanics and put together this clockwork arrangement and try to make a novel work. So I started writing my first novel when I was I was in my mid-20s, about 26, and that came out when I was 29.
Wow. Were you working full-time also, or did you make that your job? Like, how did you fit it in?
No, I was working full-time. I was working for a financial services firm it was an insurance firm, actually. I was in the marketing department for them. So I'd write in the evenings and at weekends and through, holidays, instead of going, anywhere interesting. I just sit in the room at the top of my parents' house, secretly squirreling away, just writing. I didn't tell anyone I wanted to be a writer or that I was writing. It felt like something I needed to keep quite secret and to myself. And I didn't start writing full time until I was about halfway through my second novel, or just when it became financially viable to do so.
Wow, that's amazing. Why were you afraid? Were you afraid you wouldn't be successful? Like, where did the fear come from? Let's dig deep here.
Yeah, I suppose there was just I had no examples of people around me who worked in the arts or were bookish. I'm not from a literary kind of family or a bookish household, and no one around me was bookish. So it just felt quite a slightly bombastic thing to say, I want to be a writer, or I'm going to be a writer. It's like, well, who are you to be what it felt like just what a strange and slightly unbelievable kind of goal to aim for. So I think that's why, I think just not wanting to appear big-headed, and also just perhaps not feeling as if in some sense I had quite at that time had the right to claim that kind of thing. Well, see, now once you are right, you realize it's nothing at all. It's anyone can and should do it. It shouldn't be something that is put on a different plane to any other kind of profession at all. But at that time, I did feel something that was just something otherworldly about it. Yeah.
Well, so your doppelganger could be a professional author, while you could be squirreling away in marketing or something.
Yeah, that'd work. Yeah.
Are you working on a new novel now?
I am, and I've just started. It's very early days, but the idea of the doppelganger, Zibby, won't go away. It's still gnawing at me. So clearly there is something in that image and in that idea which I'm going to have to just write out, because I don't think it's going to go away until I do actually get it on the page. So I think, but the book may well center that kind of idea or notion. But again, knowing how my creative process has worked in the last 3 novels, I could get 30,000 words into it and realize that's not going to fly, and just start again. So at the moment, it's just at a very early, delicate stage where I'm just trying to work out not even what the book is about, but like what do I want the book to be about, or what, but it's usually in the second draft that the book will tell me what it's really about.
Interesting. And what do you like to read? Do you still love to read? Do you read all the time?
Oh, I don't read anywhere near as much as I used to. I have 3 young children, so it's just time just isn't there to read as much as I did, though it's getting easier.
Dads don't have time to read books, perhaps.
Yeah, but it's getting easier as they are slowly but surely getting older. But I love to read. Yeah, I mean, I'm reading Elena Ferrante's The Days of Abandonment at the moment, which is somehow I didn't read it when it first came out, and I'm really loving that. Actually, that's really enjoyable. I love Coetzee, the South African, or I suppose now Australian novelist. Joan Didion, I really love her work. So yeah, Helen Garner. I tend to write poets. Actually, Les Murray, the late Les Murray, he's a real favourite of mine, the Australian poet. But I tend to respond to writing that's really spare and taut and terse, kind of like Didion, I guess. And that's really just feels like it's just about to break that kind of like really hard lyrical edge to a sentence. That's kind of the writing I kind of want to get to and try to kind of write myself.
There was a memoir I read a while ago that I feel like has that same sort of aesthetic, or not, maybe aesthetic's the wrong word, sort of literary style, if you will, but it's called Joy Enough by Sarah McCall.
Okay.
Sort of the Joan Didion. It's memoir, not poetry or anything else, but I don't know, you might like it. Not that you're looking for a book recommendation, but it's easy to read in like a day. It's very short. But it's about losing her mother. And I don't know, you're so good at writing female characters. So it could be research. Anyway, you might enjoy it.
Joy Enough by Sarah McCall.
Yeah.
It's quite good.
Anyway, I don't know why I'm recommending books to you, but how old are your kids, by the way?
Oh, they're 8, 6, and 4. And it's girl, boy, girl. And so, yeah, obviously they keep me more than occupied. And with the summer holidays bearing down on us, I'm kind of like fearful about what on earth are we going to do for 7 weeks unless with the restrictions as they are, lots of woodland walks, I imagine. Yeah.
Yes, I have the same. I have an 8-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy also, but I also have 14-year-old twins. And I finally have sent them to day camp, which wasn't open out here last summer. And I'm like, this is amazing.
Well, it really helped. It really helped to get those few hours of just when you can just, I can load the dishwasher, I can get something else done.
Yeah. That came out wrong. I mean, I actually started crying when they all left for camp yesterday. I was like burst into tears, but I mean, I don't mean that I don't love them home, but I think, you know what I mean?
No, yeah, definitely. I absolutely know what you mean. Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes I'm just like, I don't know how I think I'm getting all this stuff done. They're like not leaving me alone, but I don't know. So thank God for these 4 weeks of camp so I can read like 1,000 books. Anyway, Awesome. Well, do you have advice to aspiring authors?
What would I say to aspiring authors? I'd say, it took me a long time to work out, and I still probably haven't got there, what kind of writer I am and want to be, and tend to be okay with that. I spent a lot of time kind of like mimicking or emulating other writers that, when I was younger, that I admired, and because I thought that's what writing should be. And I think the sooner you can kind of get over that, the better, and the sooner you'll get to the kind of work that feels alive. So I don't know if there's any way to get to that point without perhaps, but I suppose just being aware of it, be aware of when you are perhaps just mimicking other writers that you love and that you justifiably love and that you justifiably, want to sort of like pay your dues to or doff your cap to, and to accept that sometimes the writers we love are not the writers that are most useful to us, and to be recognizing that difference. I found that certainly. And also you don't need to, I hear a lot of people say write every day, and I say you don't need to write every day, but that isn't to say only write when you feel inspired, but also don't put off writing as well. Things are much easier once things are down on the page. It's easier. The first draft is always just difficult, whereas the editing process is like, it's not joyous, but it's easier than the initial kind of like trying to lever something out of your body and get it onto the page.
I don't know though. I'm working on a memoir myself, and I just printed out my first draft, and now I'm like, how on earth am I going to edit this? It's so big. There's so many pages. Like, it's so easy for me to edit an essay, right? Because you can like see it all and move it. I'm like, how am I ever going to do this? So I don't know.
Yeah, I find I'm not that I'm giving advice, but I find putting it away for, if I can put it away for a month or so, that usually helps me in kind of like trying to just see it differently and not just come up with fresh eyes, but also other things will have happened in that meantime where I'll start thinking about it differently. But you're right, it's a big thing. It's like trying to look at an elephant through a microscope. It's not easy.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it has to be by chapter or something. I don't know. Well, anyway, I have so much respect for you and your ability to do this over and over again, and the worlds that you create and the style in which you write, and even just how you shined a light on this group of women, and, they sort of came to life in their own experience, and how that informs my own day, and feeling so grateful that I don't have to be in a China room or women's room or whatever. So anyway, well, thank you for sharing. I hope you find more time to read and write and do whatever. And, there's always Roblox for the kids on iPads. If you allow that, that's my go-to strategy.
Yeah. No, my eldest is a fan of Roblox. So yeah, we've got that one chalked up. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. All right. Well, have a great day. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Zibby. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.